close your eyes. Not in imagination alone, but in instinct, because in this world, sight is a liability. The wind flays exposed skin raw. Snow needles the face like broken glass. The sun, when it appears, is a pale, indifferent disk that offers light but no warmth. Color has been erased from existence. Greens, blues, and browns have been buried beneath an endless tyranny of white and gray. This is not a nightmare. This is not a vision of some alien planet at the far edge of the galaxy. This is Earth. This is our home as it was 20,000 years ago, at the height of the Last Glacial Maximum, the most severe phase of the Ice Age. A time when survival was not a lifestyle or a challenge to overcome, but a moment-to-moment struggle against annihilation itself. Ice ruled the world. From the polar caps, colossal glaciers crawled southward like slow, unstoppable beasts, grinding mountains into dust beneath their frozen bellies. In North America, a single ice sheet smothered nearly the entire continent, stretching from present-day Canada deep into what would one day become the United States. In Europe, the ice pressed downward from Scandinavia, crushing everything in its path. These were not thin layers of snow. These were walls of frozen time. Ice sheets over 3 kilometers thick, heavier than any city ever built. Their sheer weight depressed the Earth's crust, bending the planet itself beneath their mass. The oceans responded in kind, as so much of the world's water was trapped inside glaciers that sea levels dropped by over 120 meters. Entire continents expanded. Where waves once crashed, dry land emerged. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia to the Americas. Britain was welded to Europe. Australia was bound to New Guinea. Humanity could walk across the world on frozen pathways without ever knowing they were crossing oceans. The climate was brutal and unrelenting. Average global temperatures plummeted by 6 to 10 degrees Celsius, but numbers fail to capture the reality. Winter was no longer a season. It was a permanent state of existence. Summer, when it arrived, was a fragile truce. A few weeks of melting barely softened the uppermost layer of the permafrost before the cold returned to reclaim it. Snow did not gently fall. It scoured the land. Winds screamed across open plains at speeds capable of stripping heat from a human body in minutes. Exposure meant death, not eventually, not hypothetically, but quickly. And yet, against every rule of biology, a species with no fur, no claws, no fangs, and no natural cold resistance chose to live here. Humans should not have survived this that we evolved in Africa, shaped by sun, savanna, and warmth. Our bodies are designed to shed heat, not retain it. We sweat. We have thin skin. We rely on endurance, not insulation. In the Ice Age, these traits were not advantages. They were fatal flaws. Strip a human of shelter in sub-zero temperatures, and death arrives in hours. Blood vessels constrict. Fingers lose feeling. Muscles stiffen. Judgment fades. The heart slows. The brain starves for warmth. Hypothermia is silent, merciless, and efficient. And yet, humans did not retreat south. They did not vanish. They advanced, small bands, rarely more than a few dozen individuals, spread across the frozen continents. They followed herds. They crossed windswept tundra. They climbed mountains glazed with ice. They entered a world that should have killed them many times over. Why? Because extinction was not an option. The Ice Age world was not a frozen desert. It was something stranger, something almost impossible to imagine today. Scientists call it the Mammoth Steppe, a vast, cold grassland biome that stretched from the Iberian Peninsula across Europe, over the Russian plains, and into Siberia and Alaska. Despite the cold, this land was dry. With so much moisture locked inside ice sheets, snowfall was limited. The result was an open, treeless plain dominated by grasses, sedges, and hardy flowering plants adapted to brutal conditions. This was a land of giants. Woolly mammoths roamed in thunderous herds, their long, curved tusks sweeping snow aside to reach frozen grass below. Their shaggy coats, up to a meter thick, shielded them from temperatures that would kill most modern animals. Beneath their fur, layers of fat stored energy and warmth. Woolly rhinoceroses followed, aggressive and solitary, wielding massive horns like living battering rams. Steppe bison, larger and stronger than any living today, moved across the plains in vast numbers. Reindeer, horses, Musk oxen, and saiga antelope formed the backbone of this ecosystem. These animals were not just prey, they were moving warehouses of survival. Meat meant calories. Fat meant fuel. Fur meant warmth. Bones meant tools and shelter. Tendons meant thread. Even dung could be burned for fire, but every resource came at a cost. Humans were not alone. The Mammoth Steppe was one of the most dangerous environments in Earth's history. Apex predators thrived in the cold, their bodies optimized for killing. Dire wolves hunted in massive packs, larger and stronger than modern wolves. Cave lions, bigger than African lions, stalked the herds, capable of taking down bison with coordinated attacks. Saber-toothed cats lurked at the edges of vision, their elongated fangs designed to deliver a single, devastating bite. And then there were the cave bears, standing taller than a human even on all fours. Weighing over a ton, cave bears dominated shelters. They hibernated deep within caves, the very places humans needed most. When humans entered these dark spaces, they were not exploring. They were trespassing in the homes of monsters. Every hunt, every migration, every night spent outside a shelter was a gamble with death to survive here. Humans could not merely adapt, they had to transform. Shelter was the first line of defense in the Ice Age. Survival began with protection from the wind. Caves offered salvation, thick stone walls, stable internal temperatures, and defense against storms that could peel flesh from bone. Inside a cave, the temperature remained cool but steady. The howling chaos outside became a muffled roar. Fire could be contained, tools could be stored, children could sleep without freezing, but caves were not empty. Many bore claw marks. Scratches gouged into stone walls. Bones littered the floor, remnants of previous meals. Humans entering these spaces sometimes found themselves face to face with cave bears awakening from hibernation. Archaeological layers reveal alternating occupation. Bear, human, bear again. These were not peaceful transitions. They were violent evictions. Survival demanded dominance, even over creatures far stronger than ourselves. Yet caves were finite, and the herds did not stay near mountains. When humans followed the animals onto the open plains, they faced an impossible question. How do you build a house where there are no trees? The answer was both ingenious and horrifying. They built with the dead. Across Eastern Europe, archaeologists have uncovered circular structures composed entirely of mammoth bones. Skulls formed foundations. Jawbones became walls. Tusks arched overhead as roof supports. Ribs and long bones filled gaps like pale, skeletal bricks. Over these frameworks, thick hides were stretched and sewn together, forming windproof barriers. The edges were anchored with stones or buried into frozen ground. Smoke holes allowed fires to burn within without suffocating the inhabitants. Inside, the space was alive. Furs covered the ground. Tools lined the walls. Hearths glowed at the center. These were not crude shelters. They were homes, engineered, planned, and maintained. They represented something unprecedented. Humans were no longer just surviving in nature. They were reshaping it. If shelter was the body of survival, fire was its beating heart. Fire meant warmth. Fire meant light. Fire meant life. In a world where daylight might last only a few hours, fire extended existence. It held back the darkness that pressed in from all sides. It kept predators at bay. It transformed raw meat into digestible fuel. It hardened wooden spear shafts. It dried clothing soaked with snow and sweat. But fire was fragile. Starting a flame in freezing temperatures with damp materials was a skill passed down through generations. Humans carried fire with them, not metaphorically, but literally. Embers were preserved in dry fungi. Sparks were struck using flint and iron-rich stones. Fire kits were guarded as fiercely as weapons. Fuel was scarce. With few trees, humans burned what they could find. Animal bones rich in fat, dry dung, and even moss. Bone fires burned hot and long, glowing white with intensity. The smell was acrid, the smoke thick, but the heat was life itself. Around these fires, something extraordinary happened. Humans began to talk. Fire changed more than temperature. It changed minds. Around the hearth, faces flickered in orange light. Shadows danced on bone walls. Stories were told, not just of hunts and dangers, but of memories, of warnings, of hopes. Knowledge was passed down. Where the herds migrated, how to read the weather, how to shape a blade. Children learned by watching, listening, absorbing. Language grew more complex. Sounds became meanings. Meanings became plans. Plans became survival strategies. In the heart of the Ice Age, in a world that should have crushed imagination, the human mind ignited, and this was only the beginning. Morning did not arrive gently in the Ice Age. There were no birds greeting the dawn with song, no rustling leaves, no warmth creeping slowly across the land. Morning came as a subtle shift in the color of the sky, from black to deep blue, accompanied by the same unrelenting cold that had ruled the night. Breath crystallized instantly. Eyelashes froze together. Every movement carried risk. For Ice Age humans, simply waking up alive was an achievement. Cold is not just uncomfortable. It is aggressive. At temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius, exposed skin begins to freeze in minutes. Frostbite destroys tissue silently. Nerves go numb before pain arrives. By the time damage is felt, it is often too late. Fingers blacken. Toes are lost. Infection follows. For Ice Age humans, injury was not an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. There were no doctors, no antibiotics, no hospitals. A deep cut could fester and kill. A broken leg could mean being left behind. Survival demanded constant vigilance, not just against predators, but against the environment itself. The cold dictated everything. When people moved, where they slept, how they ate, even how long they could mourn their dead. Humans are biological outsiders in the Ice Age. Unlike mammoths or wolves, we do not possess fur dense enough to trap insulating air. We have no blubber to store heat. Our bodies are optimized for endurance, running under the sun, not for standing still in frozen wind. To survive, humans had to manufacture warmth. The solution was clothing, but not clothing as we know it today. This was not decoration or modesty. This was life support. Raw animal hides are stiff, heavy, and rot quickly. When frozen, they crack like glass. Wearing untreated skin would have been useless. To make hides wearable, Ice Age humans developed complex, labor-intensive techniques that bordered on obsession. First came scraping. Every trace of fat and flesh had to be removed using stone blades. Then came tanning. Lacking chemicals, humans used what they had: the brains of the animals themselves. Animal brains contain natural emulsifiers that soften skin when worked deeply into the fibers. This process took days. The hides were soaked, stretched, rubbed, twisted, and chewed. Teeth were tools. Archaeologists find Ice Age skulls with extreme dental wear, not from age, but from leatherwork. People sacrificed their own bodies so their families could stay warm. The result was leather that was soft, flexible, and resilient. Then came sewing. Among the most important inventions in human history is one so small it fits in the palm of a hand: the eye needle. Crafted from bone or antler, polished smooth, and pierced with a tiny hole, this tool transformed survival. With sinew thread pulled from animal tendons, humans could stitch hides together tightly, sealing out wind and moisture. This allowed for tailored clothing. Loose cloaks became fitted garments. Pants protected legs individually. Sleeves wrapped arms. Hoods trapped heat around the head. Boots were constructed with layered soles and packed with dried grass or fur for insulation. Clothing was worn in layers, fur facing inward to trap air, leather facing outward to block wind and snow. Every seam mattered. A single tear could let in cold air and doom a traveler hours later. This was not fashion. This was engineering. Nothing about Ice Age life was efficient by modern standards. Every day required enormous energy just to maintain body heat. Humans needed far more calories than people today, often 4,000 to 6,000 calories per day, sometimes more. Fat was prized above all else. Lean meat could sustain life temporarily, but without fat, starvation, known as rabbit starvation, set in even with a full stomach. This meant hunting was not optional. It was constant. But hunting consumed energy too. Tracking animals across snowdrifts, carrying weapons, standing exposed to wind. All of it burned calories faster than most meals could replace. Survival existed on a knife's edge. One failed hunt, one injured hunter, one unexpected storm. Extinction was always close. Infancy in the Ice Age was brutal. Newborns lost heat rapidly. Their bodies were small, their skin thin. Without constant warmth, they would not survive the night. Mothers kept infants pressed against bare skin beneath layers of fur, sharing body heat. Birth itself was dangerous. There were no sterile conditions, no pain relief, no surgical interventions. Complications were common and often fatal, yet children survived. They learned early. Toddlers were carried on backs as adults worked. By early childhood, they were already contributing, gathering fuel, watching younger siblings, learning to recognize animal tracks. Play was rare. Education was constant. Knowledge meant survival, and ignorance meant death. Ice Age humans did not live by calendars. They lived by migration. The great herds moved with the seasons, seeking grass beneath snow, following ancient routes carved into instinct over millennia. Humans learned these patterns intimately. They memorized valleys, river crossings, and wind shelters. A mistake in timing could mean starvation. Communities were mobile. Belongings were limited to what could be carried. Tools were multifunctional. Nothing was wasted. Camps were temporary, abandoned as soon as resources thinned. Despite this movement, humans were not isolated. They encountered other groups, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently. Territory mattered. Access to hunting grounds mattered. Conflicts occurred, but cooperation was just as vital. Exchanging mates reduced inbreeding. Sharing knowledge increased survival. Trade networks formed, stretching hundreds of kilometers. These were not scattered primitives. They were connected societies. Darkness in the Ice Age was oppressive. With limited daylight, nights stretched endlessly. Fires burned low to conserve fuel. Shadows pooled at the edges of vision. Beyond the firelight, predators waited. Someone was always awake. Night watches were essential. A sleeping camp was vulnerable to wolves, lions, or rival humans. One moment of carelessness could end an entire group. Fear was constant, but fear was also useful. It sharpened senses. It taught caution. It forced cooperation. No one survived alone. One of the most extraordinary discoveries in Ice Age archaeology is evidence of care. Skeletal remains show individuals who survived severe injuries, crippling fractures, amputations, degenerative diseases that would have rendered them unable to hunt or travel. These people lived for years after their injuries. That means someone fed them, carried them, protected them. In a world where resources were scarce and survival brutal, humans chose compassion. This choice mattered. Caring for the injured preserved knowledge. Elders remembered migrations. Toolmakers taught techniques. Storytellers held history. Survival was not just physical, it was cultural. This may have been humanity's greatest advantage. Every day in the Ice Age ended the same way, with exhaustion, muscles burned, hands cracked and bled. Faces were raw from wind and cold. Yet as people huddled around dying fires, wrapped in furs stitched by aching hands, they lived to see another night. They did not know they were shaping the future. They only knew they had survived today. But survival was about to demand more to endure. Humans would need to master the most dangerous activity of all, the hunt, and blood would stain the snow. Technology is often imagined as clean, precise, and progressive, gleaming machines, circuits, and steel. But the first true technological revolution in human history was messy, bloody, and born in the cold. It began with stone. To the untrained eye, a stone tool looks crude, an irregular shard, jagged and uneven. But to an Ice Age human, stone was a language, and every fracture carried meaning. Flint, chert, and obsidian were prized above all others. These stones fractured predictably, producing edges so sharp they rival modern surgical blades. Knapping was not guesswork. It required an understanding of angles, force, and material properties passed down across generations. One wrong strike could ruin hours of work. Master knappers were specialists. They could look at a raw stone and see the blade hidden inside it. With antler or stone hammers, they struck precise blows, removing flakes in a controlled sequence until a tool emerged. These tools were not single-purpose. A single blade could skin an animal, butcher meat, cut sinew, scrape hides, carve wood, and even perform surgery in emergencies. Stone technology was the backbone of survival, but stone alone was not enough. A blade is useless without a handle. Hafting, attaching stone points to wooden shafts, was one of humanity's most critical innovations. It transformed sharp rocks into weapons capable of killing animals many times larger than a human. This required adhesives. Ice Age humans learned to extract resin from pine trees and heat it over fire until it became sticky. Mixed with charcoal or ochre, it formed a durable glue. The stone blade was seated into a split shaft, bound tightly with sinew, and sealed with resin. The result was a composite tool, stronger, deadlier, and reparable. This was a profound cognitive leap. Composite tools required planning, delayed gratification, and an understanding that different materials could be combined to produce something greater than their parts that IT was engineering. Fire did more than keep people warm. IT reshaped materials, wood hardened when charred, creating spear shafts less likely to shatter on impact. Stone could be heat-treated, altering its fracture properties and making it easier to nap. Bone was hardened and shaped into needles, awls, and points. Fire transformed food. Cooking broke down tough muscle fibers and connective tissue. It unlocked calories trapped in raw meat and fat. It reduced chewing time, digestive strain, and disease. It allowed humans to survive on a diet that would otherwise be nutritionally impossible. Fire also altered time itself. With light after sunset, humans gained hours of productivity. Tools could be repaired. Clothing could be sewn. Knowledge could be shared. The day no longer ended with darkness. Fire was not just warmth. It was control. Hunting small animals with simple spears was dangerous enough. Hunting megafauna was something else entirely. A mammoth weighed up to 6 tons. Its skin was thick, its bones dense, its tusks capable of killing with a single swing. Charging bison moved like freight trains. Woolly rhinoceroses were notoriously aggressive, and no human could face these animals alone. Weapons had to compensate for weakness. The spear was the foundation, long wooden shafts tipped with sharp stone points. Hunters worked in coordinated groups, driving animals into traps, snowdrifts, ravines, or against natural barriers. But spears required proximity. That distance could be fatal. One of the most elegant weapons ever invented emerged during this time. The atlatl, or spear thrower. This simple device, a carved piece of wood with a hook at one end, acted as an extension of the arm. By increasing leverage, it allowed hunters to launch darts with greater speed, force, and accuracy than hand-thrown spears. The physics were revolutionary. Darts could penetrate deeper. They could be thrown from farther away. Hunters could strike without standing directly beneath tusks or hooves. This weapon transformed the balance of power. Humans could now kill from a distance. Ice Age hunts were not chaotic chases. They were planned operations. Scouts tracked herds for days, sometimes weeks. They read subtle signs: compressed snow, broken grasses, dung patterns. Wind direction mattered. Terrain mattered. Timing mattered. The goal was not always to kill. Sometimes the objective was to separate, to isolate a young, old, or injured animal from the herd. Sometimes the goal was exhaustion, forcing prey into deep snow or icy rivers where movement became impossible. Cliffs became weapons. Archaeological sites show mass kill events where animals were driven over ledges to their deaths. The cost was high: wasted meat, broken bones, but the payoff could feed a group for weeks. Hunting was not heroic. It was brutal, efficient, and necessary. The fossil record tells a grim story. Ice Age human skeletons are riddled with injuries. Healed fractures in arms, ribs, legs, and skulls are common. Some individuals survived multiple traumatic injuries over a lifetime. These were not accidents. They were the cost of hunting giants. A single misstep could mean being trampled. A misjudged throw could provoke a charge. Survival demanded courage, but courage often bled. Yet humans returned to the hunt because they had to. When an animal fell, the work began immediately. Time mattered. In freezing temperatures, meat could be preserved naturally, but predators would arrive quickly. The kill site became a frenzy of activity. Skinning knives flashed. Bones were broken to extract marrow, a rich source of fat and calories. Organs were consumed fresh. Blood was sometimes collected. Meat was sliced thin and dried or smoked. Fat was rendered and stored. Hides were cleaned and prepared. Tendons were harvested for thread. Bones were selected for tools or construction. Even stomach contents could be useful. Nothing was discarded. This efficiency was not cultural preference. It was survival mathematics. Technology does not evolve in isolation. Every new tool changed how humans thought. Planning hunts required foresight. Tool production required patience. Teaching required language. Cooperation required trust. Trust required social bonds. As tools became more complex, so did society. Roles emerged. Some individuals specialized in toolmaking. Others excelled at tracking. Some were healers. Some were storytellers. Identity began to form. Humans were no longer defined solely by survival. They were defined by skill. In the flickering glow of hearths, something unprecedented occurred. Humans began to imagine. They rehearsed hunts verbally. They told stories of ancestors. They explained the world not just through observation, but through narrative. The Ice Age forced humanity inward, into thought, memory, and meaning. And from that mental furnace emerged something that would outlast the glaciers themselves: art. The hunt did not begin with the throw of a spear. It began days earlier, sometimes weeks, with observation, patience, and restraint. In the Ice Age, reckless hunting was suicide. Every action had consequences, and a single mistake could doom an entire group. Hunting was not a moment. It was a process. Ice Age hunters learned to read the land as if it were a living text. They studied snowdrifts to determine wind direction and recent movement. They recognized the compressed trails left by herds, the subtle differences between fresh tracks and those hours old. They identified feeding grounds by exposed grasses and broken branches, bedding areas by flattened snow and dung patterns. Even silence carried information. The sudden absence of animal noise could signal predators nearby. A change in wind could carry scent for kilometers, alerting prey or danger. Hunters moved deliberately, conserving energy, communicating with hand signals and quiet sounds. Voices were used sparingly. Noise meant death. No hunt was more dangerous or more rewarding than that of the mammoth. Mammoths were intelligent, social animals. They protected their young aggressively. A single adult could kill multiple humans in seconds. Yet the reward was immense. Tens of thousands of calories, thick hides, massive bones, and enough fat to sustain a group through weeks of winter. The hunt required numbers. Dozens of people worked together: drivers, ambushers, and spear throwers. The objective was not to fight the mammoth head-on, but to control its movement. Hunters used fire, noise, and coordinated movement to funnel the herd toward a chosen location: deep snow, soft ground, ravines, or frozen rivers. Panic was a weapon. Once isolated, the target was harassed relentlessly. Spears and darts were thrown again and again, not to kill instantly, but to weaken. Blood loss, exhaustion, and injury took their toll. The final moments were violent. The ground shook. Ice cracked. Screams, human and animal, filled the air. When the mammoth finally fell, the snow around it turned dark with blood. Survival was written in red. Not all hunts were grand operations. Many were intimate. Bison hunts brought humans dangerously close to stampeding herds. A misstep could mean being trampled. Reindeer hunts required speed and endurance. Horses kicked and bit. Woolly rhinoceroses charged without warning. Hunters often engaged at arm's length. Spear thrusts required precision. A misplaced blow could glance off thick hide or bone. Wounds were inflicted from multiple angles. Some animals took hours to die. The psychological toll was heavy. Hunters were not detached from death. They felt the heat of dying bodies, heard labored breaths, smelled blood steaming in the cold air. Killing was necessary, but it was never casual. Humans were not always the apex predator. Direwolves hunted in large, coordinated packs. Cave lions were powerful ambush predators capable of bringing down prey even humans struggled to kill. Saber-toothed cats specialized in delivering a single, lethal bite. Competition was fierce. Predators shadowed human hunts, waiting for weakness. A wounded animal attracted attention. A kill site was a beacon. Humans defended carcasses aggressively. Fire was used to deter predators. Stones and spears were thrown. Sometimes, humans were forced to abandon kills to avoid death. The Ice Age was not about dominance. It was about survival through conflict. Conflict was not limited to animals. As resources shifted and herds migrated, human groups sometimes clashed. Territory mattered. Access to hunting grounds mattered. In lean times, desperation led to violence. Archaeological evidence shows trauma consistent with weapons, stone points embedded in bones, skull fractures, defensive wounds. These were not accidents. Yet warfare was not constant. Humans balanced aggression with cooperation. Alliances formed. Trade networks expanded. Exchanging goods and mates reduced conflict and increased survival. Violence was a tool, not an identity. Once the danger passed, the work began. Processing a large animal could take days. Meat had to be cut quickly to prevent spoilage. Fat was prioritized. Organs were consumed fresh. Bones were cracked for marrow. This was communal labor. Everyone participated: men, women, adolescents. Even children helped with smaller tasks. Knowledge was passed down through action. Tools dulled quickly and were resharpened on the spot. Hides were removed carefully to preserve their integrity. Tendons were extracted with precision. Every step mattered. Food preservation was critical in winter. Meat could be frozen naturally, stored in snow pits or ice cellars. In warmer periods, smoking and drying prevented spoilage. Fat was rendered into portable energy sources. Survival was measured not just in kills, but in how long those kills sustained life. A successful hunt meant security, a failed hunt meant hunger. Hunting was not purely mechanical. Evidence suggests ritual-accompanied kills. Some sites show deliberate placement of bones. Others reveal symbolic markings. There is growing belief that early humans honored the animals they killed. This was not sentimentality, it was recognition. They understood that their survival depended on death, and that balance mattered. Years of hunting carved itself into the human form. Muscles strengthened. Joints wore down. Scars accumulated. Many individuals carried lifelong injuries. Yet people lived. Not long by modern standards, but long enough to raise children, teach skills, and pass on knowledge. The hunt shaped humanity. It hardened us, but it also prepared us for something unexpected. In the aftermath of bloodshed, in the quiet moments by the fire, humans began to reflect. They remembered. They imagined. They sought explanation. Out of violence and survival emerged something fragile, powerful, and enduring: belief. Deep beneath the frozen earth, far from the howling wind and the glare of ice, humans descended into darkness. Not for shelter, not for warmth, but for something else. The caves that hold IceAge art are not near the entrances where people lived. They are buried deep within the stone, through narrow passages, along winding corridors, sometimes hundreds of meters from daylight. Reaching them required effort. Torches had to be carried. Oil lamps fueled by animal fat illuminated the way. Smoke blackened the ceilings. Oxygen grew thin. These were not casual spaces. They were chosen. On the cave walls, humans painted their world. Bison surge forward in powerful lines. Horses twist mid-stride. Mammoths loom massive and slow. Lions prowl. Rhinoceroses charge. The animals are alive, muscles tense, legs extended, heads turned as if caught in motion. These are not crude sketches. They are anatomically precise, emotionally resonant, and technically sophisticated. Artists used natural contours of the rock to suggest movement and depth. They layered pigments. They exploited shadows cast by flickering flames. Many images overlap, painted over centuries, sometimes millennia. This was not art for decoration. This was meaning made visible. The question haunts archaeologists: why spend time painting when survival demanded constant labor? Several theories exist. Some suggest sympathetic magic, the belief that depicting animals would grant power over them, ensuring successful hunts. Others propose ritual or shamanic practices, visions induced by darkness, rhythm, and altered states of consciousness. Another possibility is memory. The caves may have served as archives, visual records of animals, migrations, and events, preserved for future generations. But perhaps the simplest explanation is the most profound. Humans created art because they needed to understand their world that survived the Ice Age. Knowledge was not enough. They needed meaning. Art represents a cognitive revolution. Paint an animal is to think abstractly, to represent something that is not physically present. It requires imagination, planning, and symbolism. Handprints appear on cave walls, human signatures, sprayed with pigment. Some are missing fingers, possibly intentionally bent or symbolically removed. These marks say something unmistakable. I was here in a world where death was constant. Humans asserted existence. They left proof. Spoken language had already evolved out of necessity. Coordination, teaching, warning. But now it expanded. Stories emerged. Not just how to hunt, but why. Not just where animals went, but what they meant. Narratives connected past, present, and future. Elders spoke of ancestors. Hunters recounted triumphs and failures. Children listened, learned, and remembered. Language bound time together. It allowed knowledge to outlive individuals. Evidence suggests that Ice Age humans practiced ritual. Some burial sites showed deliberate positioning of bodies. Graves contained tools, ornaments, and pigments like red ochre, symbolic of blood, life, or rebirth. This implies belief in something beyond death. In a world where survival was brutal, humans still honored the dead. They mourned, they remembered, they believed. The Ice Age was not silent. Archaeologists have discovered flutes carved from bird bone and mammoth ivory, capable of producing complex melodies. Music required time, skill, and intention. Why make music in a frozen world? Because music binds people together. It synchronizes emotion. It soothes fear. It creates shared experience. Around the fire, sound filled the darkness. Humanity found rhythm. Adornment became common. Beads made from bone, ivory, shells, and teeth appear across Ice Age sites. Some were worn as necklaces. Others were sewn into clothing. These items served no survival function. They were symbols of group identity, status, achievement, or belonging. Humans were no longer defined solely by environment. They defined themselves. For tens of thousands of years, ice ruled the earth, but nothing lasts forever. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the world began to change. The ice loosened its grip, and humanity faced its greatest transformation yet. Change did not arrive with thunder. It came quietly, so slowly that no one noticed at first. Not in a single lifetime, not even in several. Winters softened by degrees too small to feel. Summers lingered a little longer. Snow melted earlier in the year. Rivers ran higher. Glaciers that had once seemed eternal began, imperceptibly, to retreat. The Ice Age was ending. Around 19,000 years ago, the planet entered a period of warming unlike anything humans had ever known. Earth's orbit shifted slightly. Solar radiation increased. The great ice sheets, those colossal engines of cold, started to collapse under their own weight. At first, the change was subtle. Then it accelerated. Ice walls that had dominated continents for tens of thousands of years fractured and flowed backward. Meltwater carved new rivers. Sea levels rose relentlessly, swallowing land bridges that had connected worlds. The Earth was transforming, and humanity had to transform with it, or vanish. The Mammoth Steppe could not survive the thaw as temperatures rose. Dry grasslands were replaced by forests, wetlands, and dense vegetation. The wide-open plains that supported massive grazing herds disappeared. The megafauna faltered. Mammoths struggled to find food. Woolly rhinoceroses declined as forests replaced grasslands. Giant bison herds fragmented. Some species migrated north, chasing the cold. Others dwindled where they stood. Hunting pressure from humans compounded the crisis. Whether climate change or human predation was the primary cause of extinction is still debated. But together, they were devastating. Within a few thousand years, creatures that had ruled the Ice Age vanished forever. Their bones sank into mud. Their tusks froze into permafrost. The world grew quieter. For Ice Age humans, the disappearance of megafauna was a catastrophe and an opportunity. The strategies that had sustained survival for millennia no longer worked. Massive communal hunts became rare. Fur-heavy clothing grew impractical. Bone houses were abandoned. Humans adapted. They turned to smaller game, fishing, and foraging. They learned to exploit rivers, coastlines, and forests. Tools diversified. Nets, traps, and hooks appeared. Diets broadened. Mobility changed. Some groups began to settle seasonally near reliable food sources. Camps lasted longer. Knowledge of plants expanded. The first steps toward agriculture, though still thousands of years away, were being taken. Humanity did not collapse with the Ice Age. It evolved. The Ice Age left marks that never faded. Our bodies still bear its influence. Our ability to endure cold, store fat, and cooperate under stress was forged in that frozen crucible. Our minds, wired for planning, storytelling, innovation, and empathy, were shaped by necessity. Technology accelerated. Tools refined over millennia of survival became the foundation for everything that followed. Clothing led to textiles. Fire mastery led to metallurgy. Composite tools led to complex machines. Social structures endured. The cooperation required to hunt mammoths became the blueprint for communities, trade, and eventually civilizations. Language evolved into culture, ritual into religion, stories into history. We are no longer Ice Age humans, but we are their descendants in every meaningful way. Every home that shelters us echoes the first bone huts against the wind. Every stitched garment traces its lineage to needles carved from antler. Every story told around a fire, real or digital, descends from voices fighting the darkness. The Ice Age was humanity's greatest test. We entered it unprepared, biologically fragile, and exposed that we emerged changed. Those small bands of humans did not know they were shaping the future. They did not know that their struggles would echo across tens of thousands of years. They only knew the cold, the hunger, the fear, and the stubborn refusal to surrender. They adapted when the world froze. They adapted again when it melted. That is our true inheritance. Not strength, not dominance, but adaptability. The ice retreated. The giants fell. But the fire they lit never went out. It burns in every tool we create, every story we tell, every future we imagine. And as long as it burns, humanity endures.